Configuring Azure Active Directory authentication for Azure SQL Scale-Up is a crucial step to enhance security and simplify access management. This process involves several key steps that must be followed carefully to ensure a successful setup. First, you need to create an Azure Active Directory and add your users and groups to it. This will be the central identity management system for your Azure SQL database. Next, you need to register your Azure SQL database with Azure Active Directory, which will enable Azure Active Directory authentication for your database. To do this, navigate to the Azure portal and select your Azure SQL database. Then, click on Active Directory Admin and select Add Admin. Here, you can choose an existing Azure Active Directory user or group to be the admin of your database. Once you have added the admin, you need to configure the firewall rules to allow Azure Active Directory authentication. After configuring the firewall rules, you need to create a contained database user in your Azure SQL database. This user will be used to connect to the database using Azure Active Directory authentication. To create the contained database user, you need to run a T-SQL script that includes the Azure Active Directory username in the database role. Once you have created the contained database user, you can connect to the Azure SQL database using Azure Active Directory authentication. You can use tools like SQL Server Management Studio or Azure Data Studio to connect to the database. When connecting, make sure to select Azure Active Directory as the authentication method and enter the username and password of the contained database user. Best practices recommend that you use least privilege access when configuring Azure Active Directory authentication for Azure SQL database. This means that you should only grant the necessary permissions to the contained database user and avoid using the admin account for daily operations. Additionally, you should regularly review and update the Azure Active Directory users and groups to ensure that access to the database is properly managed. By following these steps and best practices, you can successfully configure Azure Active Directory authentication for Azure SQL Scale-Up and enhance the security and manageability of your database. This setup provides a scalable and secure way to manage access to your Azure SQL database, and it is an essential step in deploying a robust and reliable database solution.